All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Hurricane Florence briefing for Friday, September 14th at 1 p.m. We'll go ahead and get started. New information, no real significant track changes. The Hurricane Center on the latest update, still maintaining hurricane strength. The center came on shore around 7:15 this morning near Wrightsville Beach. Some peak wind gusts that they have experienced thus far are in the neighborhood of 100 to 105, 106 mile an hour measured wind on shore near Wilmington. In fact, Wilmington, North Carolina measured a 105 mile an hour wind at the airport. Obviously, there's also rain. We have seen some totals approaching 15 inches so far with the storm, and that's it with some of those outer feeder bands that are to the north up near Morehead City and that extend well inland. So obviously, the rainfall that was talked about seems to be coming to fruition, especially since the storm is really slow moving and should remain in that general vicinity for the next 12 to 24 hours across eastern South Carolina, eastern North Carolina. So again, the forecast trends do continue to show generally minor impacts for northeast Georgia and eastern Georgia. There's obviously still some outside chance that we'll see a little bit more wind, but it's beginning less and less with each passing run because the storm is beginning to behave more along the lines of the forecast that's been out the last couple of days, where it goes inland. It doesn't take that southwestern jog down the coast. There's still a chance for it to do so. It hasn't gone in far enough yet that if it went south, it would be over water. It still would, but it's over a part of the land there in North Carolina where if it keeps going west, soon it will be far enough inland to where even if it does go southwest, it would be still over land. So that's good news for us, good news further west, and obviously good news for the coastline over there in South Carolina. Long-term concerns for us look like hot and dry, really, and then we get into a cooler, drier pattern into the next week. So because we're on the backside of the hurricane, which is going to open up and create eastern half of the country trough. And so as a result of this, our weather looks like it will be fairly nice over the next several days, especially once this thing clears. So moving on, and I'll let this one load since there's a couple loops on it, but we've got the radar loop and the satellite loop. You can see on the radar loop, a lot of the activity is confined to in and around the center itself, again, which is just on shore in that little piece of land that sticks out in North Carolina. The bigger concern for them are those bigger feeder bands that are spinning to the north and east. So I can draw on here. These feeder bands right here are the bigger concern because they're not moving a whole lot, and that's what's going to dump a lot of the rain further inland. So when we start to see those rain totals pile up, it'll be with those bands primarily that are going to be the ones that cause a lot of that. So and that's going to be as the storm sinks slowly to the south and west, those bands will start to come further south and west and then move inland. So you'll see that area from North Carolina down to the South Carolina border where the heaviest rainfall totals wind up piling up. It is still a dangerous storm, obviously with hurricane force winds, especially since it's still near the coast. And it is only moving west at about 6 miles an hour. And that motion is expected to generally continue, could even fluctuate down a little bit. Or may appear to stall for a period of time and then begin moving again. It's really stuck in a weak steering flow right now. Oops, go back one and clear the drawing. So in terms of our threat, we've decreased the wind threat a little bit. Again, just because the center is still expected to remain in South Carolina and is not expected to come over close to the state line based on the track that you saw. Rainfall and flooding threat only on the low end, primarily again in far eastern Georgia and then maybe far northeastern Georgia. Not so much of a concern in our forecast warning. So if the counties that are in Atlanta's county warning area, maybe the extreme eastern ones, you guys that border CWA to your east, either Greenville, Spartanburg, or Columbia, you guys may be on the border there with the yellow or the low end threat for rainfall or flooding. And again, it depends on whether it comes a little further west or not. Generally speaking, the threat really has decreased, and our confidence in this has increased that the threat is much lower. than it was maybe a couple days ago. So it's good news. Good news on that front. The tropical storm force wind probabilities, they have decreased. They were as high as almost 50% in eastern Georgia. Now they're down to a 30, maybe 35% max there in far eastern Georgia near Augusta. But it have decreased to as low as maybe 20 to 30 for you far eastern counties, Wilkes, you guys that border the Columbia office. But generally speaking, 10 to 20%. And then less than 10% for, say, west of I-75. Generally east of I-75 is where you get into that 10 to 20% chance. And most of that would be in the form of gusts and not sustained winds. And based on the forecast that we've just loaded, based on the 11 a.m. advisory, 20 to 30 mile an hour peak wind gusts possible based on the current track over eastern and northern Georgia. And I've got that on the next slide here. Oops, 2 slides from now, sorry. This is the forecast radar loop from our local WRF model. Generally speaking, it's got a good handle of where the track is, basically going up into northwestern South Carolina. And you can see some of those bands do extend back into Georgia. They are not expected to be too heavy, but maybe some light rain. You can expect maybe the stronger winds to be associated with any of those bands, and it probably won't be all that windy except maybe where you see some of these bands coming in, where you'll see some of the stronger winds. But again, we're only talking 20 to 30, maybe a little bit higher than that potentially, but we're not expecting a whole lot in the way of wind with this. And most of your rain is going to be during this period, Saturday into Sunday. And you can see the forecast radar doesn't have a whole lot on the western side. That's, again, typically the dry side. Not to mention that if the winds flowing around the back side of this are going to be coming down off the mountains, so there could be some downsloping effects associated with this off the mountains, which is typically creates a dry bias on the precipitation. So again, all things are pointing positive in terms of rain chances. In terms of the winds, this is what's in our forecast now, the peak wind gusts, and you can see again most of it's confined to eastern Georgia. Anything in yellow is above 20 forecast peak wind gusts. Anything in the brighter yellow is approaching the 30 mark. So again, you counties that are on the far eastern edge of our CWA and then maybe northeast Georgia in the mountains, you have the greatest chance of seeing a 30 mile an hour wind gust. But for the most part, everybody's going to be running 15 to 25 or so. And again, with most of that occurring probably in the bands that you see. Rainfall with an further eastern track, rainfall should not be a problem at all. Here is the storm total rainfall that we've got in the forecast now through Monday. And the primary rainfall period looks to be Saturday afternoon through midday to late day Sunday. And again, there's going to be a really sharp gradient. And you can see that both on the regional view on the second graphic and then the zoomed in view of Georgia on the top left. Quarter inch or less from I-75 west, and then quarter an inch up to an inch as you go east within our counties. And then just on the edge of our counties, it ramps up pretty quickly to 2 and then some 2 to 4 in the far northeast. So again, if any shift a little bit left on the track, just 30, 40 miles, and we start to bring some 2 to 4 inch into the eastern part of our counties and into eastern Georgia. But again, we're going to have to wait and see how the ultimate track goes. But for right now, it looks like we're generally out of the woods in terms of a flood threat. So, but still something to watch, especially for those of you on the eastern side. Everybody on the western side, especially west of I-75, really don't think there's much chance of seeing much in the way of rain, up to a quarter. Or a third, but nothing that's going to cause any significant problems. Again, Saturday afternoon into Sunday is really your time period. River flooding, a lot of that, again, with that rainfall that I just showed you, the risk for flooding is really minimal at best. There could be some flows for those on the state line over there on the east side, the Savannah River Basin. Any rainfall that occurs on the South Carolina side, The creeks and streams flowing in from that direction could create some rises on the river. But for right now, the RFC does not show much in the way of impacts, at least on the Georgia side, in terms of rivers. But again, as I alluded to last slide, something to watch with the track if it does drift a little further west than expected. But you can see, put two websites on there, both were the river ensembles. The river ensemble forecast is where you can go look at all of the different model solutions and what they, and all of the QPF or the rainfall forecast from a whole bunch of different models and what that does to the rivers, so you can kind of get a worst case, best case scenario. But what you're looking at there on the slide is the current forecast from the RFC, and you can see there's a whole slew of gauges in forecast to be in major flood in North and South Carolina. So that's obviously going to be the big story coming out of Florence, is going to be the massive amount of flooding that's occurring in North and South Carolina and even Southern Virginia. So in terms of the 5-day outlook, believe it or not, our biggest threat on the outlook is going to be the heat index values today. We're looking at 100 to 105, maybe even creeping up to 107 down in the southwest counties with heat index. There's a lot of moisture around. We're going to be sunny on the dry side, subsidence side of the hurricane. So heat index is 100 to 105, maybe approaching 107 for southwestern counties, Columbus, you guys down to Americus. But generally speaking, south of I-20, 100 to 105. So your heat index this afternoon into the early evening is going to be the issue. As we get into Saturday and Sunday, the heavy rain and flooding, we've basically knocked off any moderate risks for those, and it's really down to a low risk. And I've shown you the areas, and then that's really the main impact zone is Saturday into Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. And then as we get into Monday and Tuesday, we start to dry out, cool down a little bit. We're only looking at heat index values in the 80s north of I-20 going into early next week. So it's actually going to be pretty pleasant weather going into early next week as a result of the hurricane lifting out. So again, the threats have been slowly decreasing with time. So in summary, not much in the way of impacts expected in our area. Again, far eastern, northeastern Georgia have a low risk of impacts. I do want to, this isn't the last slide. I do have something I want to explain. There was a question that came up, but I want to bring up that after this is all over. So stay tuned even after the last slide here. Rainfall up to 3 inches, again, far northeastern mountains. And again, watch the track closely, generally less than an inch across our area, less than a half an inch across the western half of our area, with winds of 20 to 30 max across the eastern part of the CWA, primarily Saturday afternoon into Saturday evening. That looks like the window for the greatest wind threat, as the storm still has a little intensity before it starts to really wind down and weaken as it gets into the mountains of South Carolina. But again, stay alert to changes to the forecast and just generally watch for a westward trend in the forecast. That's all we have for now. I didn't change the update in the next briefing. We probably will not be doing any more briefings. We'll just do email updates from here on out and get those out to you so that you can forward them on. But we will not be doing any more special webinars. At least we don't have any planned at this time. I did get a question for those of you that are in far eastern Georgia, maybe in Columbia's area or in Greenville-Spartanburg's area that get our emails, that get our information. Asking why when I point and click on, if you live in Augusta or in Lincoln County and you click on our point click page and it says tropical storm conditions possible, but then you go to the next county over, say Wilkes County, into our NWS Atlanta's area, why does it not say tropical storm conditions possible? Well, it has to do with the internal threat grids that are created that we work off of during tropical situations. Keep in mind, Columbia is producing these for their entire forecast area because they have the hurricane moving into their eastern counties. And so they're running tropical formatters and tropical programs on all of their data that they're producing for these web pages. And part of that includes this internal threat grid that gets pushed up to the web page. The web formatters then see that and see, in fact, what you see here is based on the probabilities, we have an elevated wind threat even within our area, but because we're not necessarily running those same tropical formatters and pushing it to the web, that tropical storm conditions possible is not showing up on the point and click. But if you dig a little bit deeper and actually look at the wind speeds that are forecast on the hourly weather graph, you'll see that in both their area and our area, we're not actually forecasting tropical storm force wind gusts in any of those things. But because that grid is there, that's where that tropical storm conditions possible comes from, because it's coming from this elevated wind threat from the tropical storm hazards. If that makes any sense to you whatsoever. If it doesn't, give us a call. We can hopefully try to explain it a little better, but I'm talking with the Columbia folks over there to let them know that that's happening so that we can try and clear this up, especially for those counties that are on the far eastern side. So for those of you that get questions about it or see it, now you can understand a little bit why that's happening. But basically means we're not publishing that to our forecast because we're not meeting the criteria for tropical storm force winds. It's in their grids and they're meeting it within their whole county warning area. It's getting published with it, so therefore the formatter on the web is picking it up. That's what's happening. Hope that makes sense. But the real details should be, take a look at the details and see what the actual forecast winds are for that point that you're clicking, and you'll see that the actual data doesn't get it. So hope that makes sense. Any questions? Let's see. Besides Florence, there are a few storms forming. Do you foresee any other tropical system in the Atlantic heading towards?
The one in the Gulf this weekend.
Now, the one in the Gulf has, okay, so the question is, do we see any other threats down the road with all of the systems in the Atlantic? The one in the Gulf has weakened pretty significantly moving into Texas. Going to be basically a rainmaker for South Texas. Isaac has weakened significantly, and it's running into a hostile environment in the Caribbean. There were some models that were trying to pick up on it the last couple of days out beyond 7 days in the Gulf. They have since backed off on that. It may enter the Gulf as a weak wave sometime next weekend or the week or early the following. But right now, not expecting a whole lot. It's down to basically depression, and we'll see if that even survives across the Caribbean. It's a pretty hostile environment there. Can we explain why the hurricane lost speed so quickly and all conditions seem to be positive for maintaining speed? You talking about, I'm assuming you're going to be talking about the wind speed and why it weakened even though it was over ideal conditions for strengthening. There's obviously some things that we still weren't able to measure or capture with the storm. A lot of the models all kept trying to increase the intensity of the hurricane, but it never seemed to fruition. When I personally was looking at the storm, there seemed to be some problems with the internal core, the internal structure of it. Not sure why that was. It never seemed to get that big consistent cloud mass with an eye in the middle. It seemed to be always trying to wrap up. It just could never get a central convection and to where the eye could embed itself within that central convection. It just never seemed to do it. There'll probably be a lot of studies on why that happened, but right now we just don't have enough information as to why it did what it did. And it goes to show you that there's still a lot that we don't know.
That's it. Unless there's something.
Okay. Well, I thank everybody for their time, and again, we'll be just sending out email updates, and that will probably come to a close at some point over the weekend as we see the threats diminish. For our area, but if we see them increase, obviously we'll let you know. Thanks, and everyone have a good weekend.